week 8 of the fantasy baseball season, and he has a few hitters I would look to drop this week. The first guy's Kevin Biggio, the Toronto Blue Jays. So it's been a bad season here so far for Biggio, and the struggles, they've been real for him, no doubt about it. So far in the season, 26, a 127, 3 home runs, 11 RBIs, 14 runs scored, 2 stolen bases, a 205 batting average, and a 315 on base percentage. And now he's gone on the injured list, is Biggio, with a cervical spine ligament sprain. Just that alone doesn't sound good, and it sounds like he's going to be out for a long time with that injury here. So right now, Biggio, he was struggling so far in the season, and now with the injury, it gives a lot of owners here incentive to drop him and not feel guilty or think he's going to break out by dropping him, because it's been a struggle for him. He's been banged up, and he's been a player definitely not producing this season, where he went pretty early in some fantasy drafts in the offseason. So the last few games before he went down, May 15th, 2 for 4 with a run and a stolen base. May 16th, he didn't play. May 18th versus Boston, 1 for 5. May 19th versus Boston, 0 for 4. May 20th versus Boston, 1 for 5 with an RBI. And then the 21st, 0 for 1. So now he hasn't played a ball game since May 21st. And who knows what the timetable is going to be for Biggio's return. And right now, fantasy owners, they've dropped him in 5% of fantasy leagues. And I think this week he's an easy drop at the hitting position. The second play is Jeff McNeil of the New York Mets. Jeff McNeil, he was on the drop list last week, and he's going to be on it once again this week. He's still owned in 69% of fantasy leagues, and he's been struggling this season. He's been hurt with the hamstring injury, and last week we didn't really have a timetable when he's going to be out, but it looks like he's going to come back in early July, with the reports saying he's out till late June. And those hamstring injuries, I've been saying, are obviously tricky. And a lot of guys, they've been straining them or tearing them, running the bases, or even routine fielding plays. So McNeil on the season, 24 and 99, 3 home runs, 8 RBIs, 13 runs scored, a stolen base, a 242 batting average, and a 336 on base percentage. So McNeil, he was definitely struggling. And now this injury here, he's a guy definitely should be dropped. And he's been dropped in 4% of fantasy leagues so far. And now you're going to miss him another 4 or 5 weeks for your fantasy roster. I know a lot of teams in their leagues have injured lists and stuff, but I don't think McNeil's worth the stash. He was struggling so far this season, and now it's going to take him a while to get back into the mix of things and get things going. So right now, I don't think he's a stash. I think he's a drop. This week's play is Andrew McCutchen of the Philadelphia Phillies. So Andrew McCutchen, former MVP with the Pittsburgh Pirates seasons ago, and hey, he's still hanging on, and he's still playing here in the bigs and got a decent contract from the Philadelphia Phillies a few off seasons ago. But so far this season, McCutchen, it hasn't been that great of a year for him. 33 of 157, 7 home runs, which is pretty decent though, 21 RBIs, 22 runs scored, but a 210 batting average and a 333 on base. So McCutchen, he's still showing some pop this season, but that batting average is terrible. In the last couple weeks, that batting average has dropped even more. For 170, he's batting in the time with 2 home runs, 6 RBIs, and a 323 on base percentage. So right now, McCutchen, he's not producing. He's not hitting the baseball well. And right here, a lot of fantasy owners are going to look to drop him this week if this slump continues here for McCutchen. And the last few games for McCutchen, May 20th, versus Miami, 0 for 4. May 21st versus Boston, 1 for 5 with a run. May 22nd versus Boston, 1 for 5. May 23rd, 0 for 4. May 24th at Miami, 1 for 4 with a run. So right here, McCutchen, it's been a struggle for him, no doubt about it. But obviously, they're going to keep going out there as Philly and play this guy. He definitely could turn things around, but right now, I just wouldn't wait on McCutchen to break out and get out of his slump here if I'm a fantasy owner, because there's better options on the wire, which I mentioned yesterday, a bunch of names I gave out. But right here, McCutchen's struggling, and he's a player that should be dropped this week, in my opinion. The next hit is his teammate, Gregorius of the Philadelphia Phillies. So another Philadelphia Philly batter that's been struggling, and a guy who's been on the injured list now for a week or two here with an elbow injury. And now reports coming out yesterday that there's no timetable for Didi's return, and a lot of fantasy owners over the last 2-3 weeks, they've dropped him in 15-20% of leagues here, and he's been dropped already so far this week in 3% of leagues after the news coming out that there's no timetable for his return with the elbow injury. And Didi, like I mentioned, he really wasn't producing before he went down. So far this season, 4 home runs, 22 RBIs, 10 runs scored, a .229 batting average, and a .266 on-base percentage in 118 at-bats. So it was a decent sample size for Didi. He played about 6 or 7 weeks so far this season. And then before he went down, he was batting 182 and 33 on-base percentage and 2 home runs, 10 RBI. So Didi right now, he's a play I would drop. I wouldn't stash him on my injured list. And now with no timetable for his return, it sounds like to me he's going to be out to July or August, because these elbow injuries, they're no joke, even for a position player. And obviously for a pitcher, it's devastating. And the 5th and final hitter I would look to drop here this week's Jorge Polanco, Minnesota Twins. So Polanco, he's been banged up a little over the last couple games here. And on the season so far, 3 home runs, 18 RBIs, a .232 batting average, a .306 on base, and 21 runs scored. But over the last couple weeks, the numbers have been even worse. 1 home run, 4 RBIs, a .220 batting average, 6 runs scored, and a .304 on-base percentage. So in 2019 was the last good season for Polanco, where we saw him have big Terry games where he was hitting in the 320s to 330s. But last season he came back down to earth with a .258 batting average. And so far this season, a .232 batting average. And he hasn't played since May 20th. So the last few games before he went down for Polanco, May 17th versus Chicago, 1 for 4 with an RBI. May 18th versus Chicago White Sox, 1 for 4 with a run and an RBI. May 19th versus Chicago, 0 for 3. And May 20th, 0 for 5 with a run. So right here, Polanco, he's been banged up the last couple games with an ankle injury, but reports are coming out that he's most likely going to return here tonight. But he just wasn't producing for fantasy owners, and I think he's an easy drop at this time, and he's been dropped in 5% of fantasy leagues so far this week. So right here, I would go out there and drop Polanco. So that's a few I would look to drop here in Week 8 of the fantasy baseball season.